A legendary figure in country music arrived for what was supposed to be an ordinary television appearance and instead found himself subjected to the most dismissive behavior he had ever experienced on camera. Years of discipline, patience, and quiet dignity suddenly clashed with the sharp edge of modern talk show arrogance. The exchange escalated into a tense on-air moment that stunned viewers and ultimately pushed one of the hosts to abandon the set after a verbal exchange that would be talked about for years. The studio lights burned brightly on a Tuesday morning as Willie Nelson took his seat in the familiar guest chair on The View. At 90 years old, he was no stranger to interviews, having shared conversations with nearly every major television host across several generations. Yet the atmosphere felt unsettled. There was a tightness in the room, an undercurrent of irritation, and Joy Behar appeared restless long before the broadcast officially began. A floor manager announced the upcoming return from commercial break. Willie calmly adjusted his well-known braids and mentally reviewed notes about his latest album and his upcoming tour. He had genuinely anticipated the appearance, knowing the show reached an audience far beyond the usual country music crowd. Joy, meanwhile, flipped through her cards with visible annoyance, her movements sharp and impatient. Her muttered remarks carried farther than she seemed to realize. She complained about devoting airtime to an artist whose peak, in her view, belonged to another era. The words were careless and dismissive, spoken as though the guest were not sitting just feet away. Whoopi Goldberg quickly signaled her to stop, reminding her that Willie could hear every word. Joy brushed off the warning, waving her hand and doubling down, suggesting that his relevance had long since expired. Willie's expression stayed composed, though his eyes grew more alert. In decades of performing, he had dealt with ego and hostility, but such open disrespect before the cameras rolled was rare. The countdown began, fingers ticking down toward silence. Whoopi opened the segment with warmth, welcoming the audience back and introducing Willie Nelson as a country music icon who had just released his 73rd studio album. Willie thanked her with his familiar soft drawl, maintaining grace and courtesy. Joy interrupted almost immediately, pushing aside the natural rhythm of conversation and challenging the value of releasing so many albums, implying repetition and creative exhaustion. She reduced his work to tired cliches, dismissing decades of evolution in a single stroke. So the other hosts shifted uneasily. One cleared her throat while another stared down at her notes, avoiding eye contact. Willie remained outwardly pleasant, though his tone sharpened with quiet firmness. He explained that her assumptions reflected stereotypes rather than reality, noting that his latest work explored social awareness, environmental responsibility, and spiritual reflection. Joy laughed sharply, the sound carrying an edge that unsettled the room. She scoffed at the idea of a 90-year-old engaging with such themes and suggested that retirement would be more appropriate, leaving space for younger voices. A low murmur rippled through the audience. The show was known for honoring long careers, not undermining them. Willie responded slowly and deliberately, pointing out that discouraging someone from pursuing their passions solely because of age carried a troubling implication. He named it plainly, describing it as age-based prejudice. Joy bristled, her face flushing as she defended herself by framing her comments as realism rather than bias. She spoke of generations passing and relevance shifting with time. Willie calmly noted that despite such claims, he continued to create, perform, and connect with listeners across age groups. Whoopi tried once more to salvage the segment, shifting attention to Willie's guitar, Trigger, an instrument beloved by fans and musicians alike. Joy could not resist inserting another barb, commenting that the battered guitar belonged in a museum rather than on a stage. She questioned how anyone could still play an instrument that worn down. Willie's hand moved instinctively toward the guitar resting beside him, its surface marked by decades of use, its scars telling stories of countless nights on the road. He spoke softly, explaining that the guitar had accompanied him through every song, every stage, and every high and low of his life. It was not damaged, he said, but seasoned by time and experience. Joy snorted at the description, comparing the instrument's condition to what she called the collapse of his career. The insult lingered in the air, heavier than all the others combined. Willie looked at her for a long moment. His face revealed nothing, then slowly transformed into a small, unexpected smile. It was not a defensive grin or an angry smirk, but the expression of someone who had reached clarity. It was the look of a man who knew where his line was and had decided it would not be crossed again. His voice shifted, carrying a new firmness that caused everyone in the studio to lean in. He stated that it was time for an honest exchange, not the artificial confrontation that had been unfolding for the cameras. Joy rolled her eyes, dismissing the moment as another display of homespun philosophy. Willie corrected that assumption calmly, explaining that what followed was simply truth. He pointed out that for several minutes, she had attempted to tear down a 90-year-old man on live television. She had belittled his work, his age, the artists he respected, the causes he championed, and even the instrument closest to his heart. Joy fired back instantly, declaring that she was practicing journalism and focusing on what she believed mattered. Willie let out a quiet chuckle, warm but edged with steel. He remarked that, from his perspective, it looked less like journalism and more like an attempt to humiliate a guest in order to feel significant. The audience fell into complete silence, the hum of the studio equipment suddenly audible. Joy snapped again, insisting she needed no such validation, her voice sharp as the moment hung unresolved in the air. Willie spoke with quiet reflection, noting that he had been part of television longer than many people in the room had been alive. In all those decades, he said he had never witnessed someone put so much effort into making themselves appear smaller in the process of tearing someone else down. Joy's face darkened, shifting from red to an almost purple shade. She demanded clarification, but Willie remained steady. He explained that her attempt to reduce an entire lifetime of work only revealed her own character to everyone watching. Whoopi tried to interrupt and de-escalate, but Willie gently stopped her, saying that Joy had asked for honesty, and now she had it. He continued by pointing out how clearly Joy had expressed her belief that he no longer mattered, that his music had lost value, and that the causes he supported belonged to the past. What fascinated him, he said, was the depth of detail she seemed to know about a career she claimed was meaningless. She had referenced his collaborations with younger musicians, mentioned Farm Aid, and cited the number of albums he had released. That level of familiarity, he observed, suggested considerable attention to someone supposedly irrelevant. Joy quickly defended herself by claiming she had simply done research. Willie offered another possibility, suggesting that perhaps she had been listening longer than she wanted to admit. Maybe there was something in that so-called outdated music that continued to pull her, in despite her resistance. She rejected the idea outright. Willie leaned back in his chair, visibly at ease now, and remarked that he had noticed a pattern over the years. People who aggressively attacked artists they insisted they did not care about were often wrestling with something unresolved within themselves. Joy snapped back, telling him not to analyze her. The insult that followed landed sharply, causing audible gasps from the audience. Sarah Haynes covered her face with both hands, unable to watch. Willie lifted his eyebrows slightly and acknowledged the remark with calm irony. At least now, he said, the bias was being stated openly rather than disguised as journalism. Joy insisted it was not bias but reality, declaring that his age, his music, and his era were finished. Willie replied evenly that, despite those claims, he was sitting on her show promoting his 73rd album, which had debuted at the top of the country charts the previous week. His tone never wavered as he noted the irony of an allegedly irrelevant artist leading the charts. Joy, now visibly unsettled, dismissed the achievement by claiming those charts did not count. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Audience members rose from their seats, voices overlapping in protest. Someone shouted for her to stop, while another called out in condemnation. Willie raised his hand, and the room quieted almost instantly. The authority of that simple gesture, earned through decades of respect, filled the studio. He reassured the audience that it was all right and stated that Joy was entitled to her opinion. The word triggered an outraged response from her, but Willie calmly explained his meaning. He pointed out that she had just dismissed an entire genre that shaped countless styles of music, from rock to hip-hop. She had insulted millions of listeners who found comfort and meaning in that tradition, all while revealing a lack of understanding of the subject she was criticizing. Alyssa finally spoke up, affirming that Willie's influence on music crossed genres and generations, with artists everywhere citing him as inspiration. Willie thanked her graciously, then turned his attention back to Joy. Bull, he said it was clear she had no interest in discussing influence or cultural impact. What she seemed interested in, he observed, was turning cruelty into a form of entertainment. Joy denied that accusation, insisting she was simply being truthful. Willie countered that honesty required reflection. He described the moment when she would eventually be alone with her own thoughts, considering how she had treated a guest who came in good faith. He spoke about the use of a national platform to inflict harm rather than foster conversation. Joy appeared stunned, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a response. Willie continued, stating that the core issue was not music or age, but intention. He described the attempt to use humiliation for attention, to shrink another person for the sake of a reaction. He explained that he had lived too long and seen too much to be diminished by such tactics. He asked her to account for her behavior, to explain to viewers why hostility had seemed appropriate in that moment. Joy glanced around the studio, looking for support, but her co-hosts remained silent, their eyes fixed on their notes as the weight of the moment settled over the room. The audience stared at her, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. Even the crew behind the cameras looked uncomfortable, some unable to hide their embarrassment. Joy tried to steady herself and offered a weak defense, saying she had only been asking serious questions about relevance in today's music business. Willie nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. He repeated her phrase back to her, letting it hang in the air, then calmly broke it down. He pointed out that calling his collaborators charity cases, ridiculing farmers fighting to keep their land, and mocking his guitar as if it were falling apart, hardly qualified as serious journalism. Each example landed with precision, stripping away her argument piece by piece. Joy's defensive posture began to crumble as the realization set in that millions of viewers were seeing her words reflected back without distortion. She accused Willie of twisting what she had said. He responded evenly, suggesting they simply review her statements. His voice took on the tone of a patient instructor as he listed them clearly and without embellishment. She had accused him of recycling old ideas, suggested he retire to make room for younger artists, implied that newer musicians only worked with him out of pity, dismissed Farm Aid as an outdated cause, portrayed farmers as people seeking handouts, and reduced his guitar and career to relics falling apart. When he finished, the simplicity of the recap was devastating. Hearing her remarks laid out so plainly caused Joy to sink into her chair. She muttered that she had been making points about the industry. Willie corrected her gently but firmly, explaining that there was a clear difference between thoughtful critique and personal cruelty, and that she had crossed that line almost immediately. Sarah Haynes finally spoke, remarking on Willie's composure under pressure. He thanked her, then clarified that he was not offended by differing opinions about his music. Taste was subjective. What troubled him was the pleasure Joy seemed to take in delivering her insults. Joy's face shifted through deepening shades of red and purple as she tried to repeat that she had not been cruel. Willie turned toward her directly and offered what he framed as advice. When someone attacks another person's life's work with enjoyment, mocks their age, and belittles the things that matter most to them, that behavior crosses into cruelty. Doing it on television does not transform it into journalism. It turns it into public humiliation. The studio grew heavy with silence as his words settled. Before Joy could respond, Willie continued, his voice growing stronger. He pointed out the contradiction between the values she claimed to represent and her actions that day. She had built her public image around advocating for the marginalized and speaking for those without power, yet she had used her platform to target someone she viewed as vulnerable because of age. That, he said plainly, was not courage. It was bullying. Joy finally snapped, accusing him of daring to label her a bully after decades of activism. Willie replied without raising his voice, noting that she had just demonstrated age-based prejudice on national television. She tried to justify herself by saying he should know when to step aside. Willie countered that this sounded less like principle and more like entitlement. The implication that she deserved the spotlight more than he did lingered in the air, sharp and uncomfortable. Joy's anger exploded. She declared she had earned her place and did not need lectures from a washed-up cowboy. That insult ignited the audience. Shouts erupted, demanding an apology, voices overlapping in outrage. Willie rose slowly, his guitar in hand. The simple act brought immediate quiet. When he spoke, his tone was calm and deliberate. He said he had come to discuss music, unity, and shared humanity during difficult times. Instead, she had chosen to embody everything broken about public discourse, showing disrespect not only to him, but to the spirit of the show itself. Joy leapt to her feet, screaming that she would not be lectured. Whoopi tried to intervene, her face pale, but Joy was beyond control. She unleashed a final barrage, declaring his music had never been that good, that his success was luck from decades ago, and that he was now nothing more than a desperate old man clinging to relevance. The studio froze. Even the cameras stopped moving. Willie looked at her quietly, then shook his head with visible sadness. He said that in his long life, he had learned that such vicious attacks usually revealed more about the attacker than the target. Turning to the audience and the cameras, he thanked them for their kindness and reminded everyone that music was meant to unite, not divide. Joy shouted again, demanding not to be dismissed. Willie turned back to her, his expression softened by something close to pity. He spoke about respect, about how there was nothing false in treating people with dignity. That was the breaking point. Joy ripped off her microphone, threw it to the floor, and announced she was finished. She stormed off the set, shouting insults as she went. As she disappeared backstage, Willie called out gently that he hoped she found what she was searching for. The studio was left in stunned silence. Willie returned to his seat and picked up his guitar. With a small, calm smile, he remarked that there was now extra time to talk about music. The audience erupted into applause, releasing the tension that had gripped the room. Whoopi, still visibly shaken, managed to regain her composure and professionally introduce Willie once more. He strummed a soft chord and spoke about the importance of continuing to create, even in the face of hostility, turning an ugly confrontation into a quiet reminder of grace, self-respect, and perseverance.